Ryan Lee here, host of the GSMC College Football Podcast. Just wanted to start off this episode by saying that I recorded this episode on 2 separate days on 2 separate microphones, so you're going to be hearing a lot of really weird things going on with my mic. Please bear with it. I know it's not going to sound great. However, this episode is still going to be a fantastic one, going over my bets and going over the conference finals. I hope you're staying safe. I hope you have an amazing holiday and enjoy the rest of the episode.
Welcome to the Golden State Media Concepts College Football Podcast, your ticket to all things college football. Are you looking to get your college football fix? Looking to get the latest news on your favorite school's team? Join us as we talk college football, from the national championship to college rivalries to bowl games to the Heisman Trophy to which conference is the best. We've got you covered for the Big 10, SEC, Big 12, Pac-12, ACC, and everything in between.
Thank you for tuning in to the GSMC College Football Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. My name is Ryan Lee. I hope you're once again staying safe amongst the pandemic, and we have got a load of things to talk about, including some of my picks from last week, as well as some of upcoming news related to the National Football College Playoff, and we've got some conference finals that are coming set, and why each one is important to not only the respective conferences, not only the teams involved, but why it shakes up the entire CFP playoff structure as a whole. I'm excited. I hope you are too. Let's get right into it, and we're going to simply start off with this, is that everything that gets done, no matter where you are, how you're doing it, whatever happens to you is kind of a combination of many things, but a large chunk of it is kind of up to you, whether if it's individually or whether it's as a unit. Every single thing that you do, every single thing that you pursue, every single thing that you drive toward and strive for is more or less up to you. And you can be the best employee, you can be the best worker, you can be the best person ever in the entire world on anything. However, you can only go as far as what you let yourself be. Now, this is one team, for example. I didn't think they were good. I thought they were really good. Did I think they were great? Not quite. However, this one team, who I thought was really good, they took a huge step back over the weekend because of the fact that they did everything they could to utilize all the resources they had. They did everything they can to not only utilize all those resources, but to maximize them to what they are. In this case, it would have been a dub and a chance at an undefeated record still. And not only did they actually have a better performance, not only did they actually do better, but also it's the fact that as a unit, there were some things that they could not control, but they did their best to do so. Like, for example, the team in question I have right now, in their matchup over the weekend, they were outgained by about 40 yards. Actually, believe it or not, the team that they faced had 281 rushing yards, while they themselves got 165. They got severely outgained, and in the air, the team they faced did absolutely nothing. 85 total yards, which is nothing. 15 pass attempts, 10 completions on 85 yards as a team versus one of the top talents in the nation at 240 yards in the air. Zach Wilson can only do so much as an individual, because what happened is that everything else around him really did not do anything to help. Because as I said earlier, 240 yards versus 85. Grayson McCall did not do very much in the air at all. In fact, CJ Marable and the Coastal Carolina Chanticleers absolutely manhandled their way through the game slowly and surely. They just slowly kept chipping away at it. Sure, Zach Wilson might have gotten an interception at one point, but at the same time, it doesn't change the fact that the Chanticleers really put themselves in a position to succeed. Almost 38 minutes of clock possession time. And this is all within an hour. There's an hour of game time. They left the BYU Cougars with only 22 minutes of clock time. That's why BYU is stuck at 9-1 as of right now. And there wasn't even that big of a mismatch. Turnovers were 2-1. Yardage was only 40 yards apart. Equally efficient on first downs. All that good stuff. But I think a lot of what went on in this game between the Cougars and the Chanticleers just simply came down to how effective were you at managing the game. This game is not a game for those who want highlights. This game is not one for those who wanted to see what some are referred to as the flash or the splash or whatever you want to call it. This was in fact the exact opposite of that. Do you want to know how effective this was? Not only did the Chanticleers get only 85 yards rushing, but they had 3 receivers on 10 yards total throughout the entire game, which is darn near nothing. This isn't even Grayson McCall's team. This is CJ Marable's team. 132 yards and 2 touchdowns. In fact, he's got a very effective season so far, actually, where he's actually sitting at about 700 yards so far in the year and 10 touchdowns. 10 touchdowns and 700 yards in 10 games. That's not bad. He's averaging a touchdown a game and about 75 yards per game. But over the weekend, he really took the time to explode. When you have 54 rushing attempts as the entire team, it only makes sense that you're trying to control the game. The game plan was very clear here for BYU. Stop the run. Every highlight I saw from Coastal Carolina on offense was a run. There wasn't really any notable passes I could really note throughout the entirety of the game. However, the thing is, if Zach Wilson wants to be taken as a serious Heisman candidate and possibly a serious number 1 overall draft pick, or if not the number 1 overall draft pick, at least a first rounder, you got to be able to bury teams like that. That is not a situation where you just simply go coasting through it. That's when we have to bury them. So I big time whiffed on BYU. I picked BYU minus 11. I didn't expect Coastal Carolina to bring such an aggressive rush attack that for whatever reason BYU just couldn't attack against. It seemed like every time BYU tried to counterattack, the Chanticleers had some sort of response and just all had to do with the offensive line parting the seas. But honestly, credit to Coastal Carolina. They do not have very strong opponents left in the schedule. They do not have a lot left to go. But the Chanticleers have a pretty great shot at actually having their first undefeated season ever. And it contributed to the fact they jumped up 3 spots to number 11 in the country in the AP poll. And some of the teams they jumped on, at least in the AP top 25, there's some notable teams on here. They're beating out Georgia, beating out Oklahoma, USC, some teams who we saw as really good. Because sometimes when teams are touted or when they're expected to be really good, sometimes they do nothing but disappoint you and kind of fall flat. They don't exactly have the most talented person, don't exactly have the best players on their team. However, so far as a unit, they've been playing absolutely phenomenal. They have a lot of great talent all around their field. But the thing is, you're taking great talent and putting them on the same team with good chemistry and good bonds. That team is one that's going to be feared. It's a team that is doing everything they can to make sure they have a shot at the playoffs. Can they guarantee it? We don't know. But they are shooting for it. The Texas A&M Aggies. Number 5 in the nation. They essentially have to put all of their baskets into the Big 12. They essentially have to put all of their baskets inside of this ACC Championship bucket. Texas A&M has Tennessee left to go. However, right now it seems to be Alabama and Florida in the SEC finals. I'm not going to lie, Texas A&M has been done dirty by the system. They've been just as good as a lot of these teams. Their one loss was to Alabama. They actually defeated Florida earlier in the year. I honestly have not expected Kellen Mond to be helping out his team so much. Kellen Mond, when I was initially reporting on these games and looking up the stats and kind of being able to see things from the eye test, Kellen Mond kind of seemed to me to be this very potentially project quarterback. I didn't really take him as someone who could seriously make a run for anything. However, he's been solid. It's been great, but he's been solid. He knows how to manage a game. How to make sure everything goes exactly the way it's supposed to do and make sure that nothing goes completely sideways. Whether if it's launching 2 touchdown pass over to Jalen Watermeyer, or whether if it's spreading the ball 18 receptions amongst 6 different receivers. Or whether it's not, it's throwing a pair of touchdowns and making sure nothing goes by. Only 1 sack on Kellen Mond, which honestly, big credit to Texas A&M and their O-line. Letting Mond have a clean pocket to work with. That's kind of what the quote-unquote game manager archetype kind of is. You kind of think about guys like Case Keenum. You kind of think of guys like Alex Smith. Guys who focus mostly on not the longest passes in the world. However, they know how to get that completion. They know how to make sure the ball gets in the right hands. They know how to make sure that the ball somehow finds its way into the end zone without having it hit a defender's hands. The Aggies jumped to 7-1 with that 31-20 win over Auburn. However, I completely mistook what Auburn was at the beginning of the year. I completely thought that the Tigers were something better. I was wrong. I thought they'd be better. They haven't been. They allowed a pair of sacks and 5 tackles for loss. 2 touchdowns, both by Bo Nix on the ground. And when I say Kellen Mond was a game manager, he really was. 29 first downs versus 16. 509 yards of total offense versus 340. Over 300 yards on the ground. Literally the split on time possession is 38 to 22 minutes. And also it helps that Mond and company didn't cough it up on 3rd down. 64%, 7 for 11. And that doesn't change the fact he wasn't all over the place with the ball. 70% completion percentage is really good. And for a play manager, that's the right way to go about it. But that's also no discredit to A&M's defense. Or should I credit to the lack of what Auburn really has? I thought about Auburn as one thing. However, Auburn really something else. I saw this Auburn as this very powerful football team. This organization kind of built on that toughness, that grit. But now who knows what they are? One day they beat you physical, the next day they beat you finesse. One day they just get absolutely steamrolled, one time they're going to pile the points on. Another time it's going to be a random last fluky minute play. Auburn finds all kind of crazy wins both to win and crazy ways to lose. They're currently sitting at 5-4 for a reason. I love the games for A&M so far. I've actually gone some crazy directions. Kentucky was ranked 23 at the time. Auburn only won by about 16. Georgia was number 4. They lose by 19. Arkansas is unranked. They win by 2. South Carolina was unranked. They lose by 8. Ole Miss, they win by 7. Unranked. And then they dominate LSU by 37. Also unranked. And then they beat Tennessee by 13. Lose to number 1 Alabama by 29. And then lose to number 5 A&M by 11. They have the rescheduled Mississippi State game coming up this weekend. And I still have zero idea how to gauge Auburn. I still have zero idea. I could honestly see them being a 500 team, and it wouldn't surprise me. If Auburn were to go 5-5, I'd have zero surprise. The thing is that the Tigers have been very okay as a program, at least ever since that amazing run back in 2011 when they won all with Cam Newton, and even have gone a long way since their last BCS championship appearance in 2013. They've gone 8-5, 7-6, 8-5, 10-4, and then 8-5, 9-4, so far 5-4. They hover right about 500. And do you know what teams that we call those? Those teams that hover above 500? The Tennessee Titans before last year. That is what we call them. Another good example is the Chicago Bears. Literally 1 year, they'll be super high up. They'll be way above 500. And the next year, they'll do right at 500, maybe one win over. It's maddening. Bears fans, I don't know how you do it. But credit to them. I nailed the head on the coffin with A&M and Auburn. I was minus 5.5, and I took it. It was one of those things that only made sense to me. It only made sense. Because the thing is that they expect Bo Nix to be a one-man wrecking crew when he can't be. Who knows? Maybe in general circumstances, Bo knows. But in this circumstance, I don't think it does. Final game is Indiana-Wisconsin. I will start out of the gate. I picked Indiana plus 13.5, and I hit that nail right on the head. 14-6 was the score. Not that great of a game. Very defensive heavy, very underwhelming in terms of offense. Only about 550 yards on total offense between both schools combined. 217 and 342 in favor of Wisconsin. I mean, yeah, 10 possession does go in favor of Wisconsin, 35-25 in terms of time. But it's about understanding a lot of things that have been done right. 202 yards in the air for Graham Mertz. 130 for Jake Tuttle. 87 yards on the ground for Indiana versus 140 for Wisconsin. There was a lot of things that Wisconsin did that really messed them up in the long run. I kind of made this point in the last show where backups are in a very interesting position. So one of the points I made in the last week's show is that backup quarterback is one of the most interesting positions in all sports. Because it can go one of two ways. You can, at least in the NCAA level, you can either be that backup that's just there, holding the clipboard, there essentially just in case a massive injury happens, and who even knows if it's going to happen in the first place. Or what you can do is train, work, until something happens. And of course, it's not going to happen immediately. So some quarterbacks, most likely the third stringers in this case, they're just going to simply hold the clipboard and just be done with it by the time the career is over. However, you get a lot of quarterbacks who start out as backups, starter goes down for whatever reason, and then they step in the role and make something ginormous of themselves. There have been a lot of great examples of this in the past several years. Tua Tagovailoa replaced Jalen Hurts when Hurts got benched in the national finals game. And then Tua does such a good job that he actually ends up helping Alabama win it all. You get people like Spencer Rattler, who, although he is listed as a freshman, he's a redshirt freshman. So when you get a redshirt freshman, what do you get a chance to do? You get a chance to just learn, grow, and develop underneath your coaches and underneath those who are already starting above you. And when that happens, it's a matter of whether they can step up and fill those shoes. Spencer Rattler has done a plentiful job of that ever since Jalen Hurts has left, because of the fact he's had a chance to get coached and get development from Lincoln Riley and Jalen Hurts and all those people. And now starting quarterback for the Eagles. We saw it earlier this year with DJ Uiagalelei in Clemson. Literally have himself an absolute performance against the number 2 ranked Notre Dame at the time. And we see it here again with Jake Tuttle and the Indiana Hoosiers. 130 yards is nothing to be really crazy about. But 2 touchdowns in the debut is pretty good. He didn't really have any sort of big miscues. Only 1 sack the entire game. And 4 passes deflected. He's at 13 for 22, which honestly is not the greatest. For context, it's only 59%. However, it was his first ever collegiate start. And first of anything is kind of scary. This dude's a sophomore. Michael Penix, also a sophomore. So most likely for Indiana, Tuttle's going to have to either transfer or something like that in order to get a legitimate shot. However, with Penix going down, and he's actually performed so far pretty solid with the rest of the season going on for Indiana, with Penix being out the ACL injury, this is Tuttle's time to shine. I know there have been some weird flexes going on with the scheduling and all that. Like right now it looks like the Big 10 title game is going to be between Ohio State and Northwestern. But Jake Tuttle might honestly make himself a case with the film he's put up in the one game. I call it the quarterbacks not only have a chip on the shoulder, but they have a chip on their entire neck and back as well. And that was clearly the case for Jake Tuttle, and that's clearly why he performed so well. That's why Indiana absolutely dominated this game. Even though they were behind in possession by about 5 minutes. You do the right things at the right times, the right rewards will come out. It's doing the right things at the right time. And also, 13.5 just seemed way too much. Those were my picks from last week. We're going to have an excellent segment coming up after this about some of the latest news involving the conference championship games. And I'm going to break down each and every single one of those and why they're so important not only to the shakeup of the individual teams or the individual conferences, but also the entirety of the NCAA as well. That's coming up right after this.
Are you looking for the very best NFL and college football podcast? Then check out the GSMC Football Podcast. Get the latest football news both on and off the field. From the NFL Draft to trades to the rumor mill to the NFL Combines. They got you covered. That's GSMCpodcast.com/football-podcast. Get updates on college rivalries, game day insights, and much, much more. It's football talk the way you want it. This show eats, sleeps, and breathes football. Don't forget to like them on Facebook and follow them on Twitter. Visit GSMCpodcast.com for more info.
Tired of searching the vast jungle of podcasts? Now listen close and hear this out. There's a podcast network that covers just about everything that you've been searching. Hey! The Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network is here. Nothing less than a podcast bliss with endless hours of podcast coverage. From news, sports, music, fashion, cooking, entertainment, fantasy, football, and so much more. So stop lurking around and go straight out to the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. Guaranteed to fill that podcast itch. Whatever it may be. Visit us at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Follow us on Facebook and Twitter, and download us on iTunes, SoundCloud, and Google Play.
By the GSMC Podcast Network. Ryan Lee here once again. And we have some very important news to get through, especially pertaining to some of these conference finals that have occurred, especially as of late. I'm going to be going through what I think were the most important ones throughout the past weekends. There were 4 in total. However, I'm going to break them down 2 at a time. I'm going to break up the first 2 today, and then the first two on Tuesday, because I'm not going to put an episode out on Saturday. Please feel free to enjoy your time with your family on the holiday. Happy holidays. Merry Christmas for those who celebrate it. And for the rest of you who do, happy holidays as well. And it was a very great weekend of football. My Bills clinched the AFC East for the first time in 25 years. And we had some excellent, beyond excellent games throughout the entire weekend in both the NCAA and the NFL. You know, there's a lot of things, especially in this time, where it's a little bit of an unconventional time in the realm of sports. The NHL would typically start back in October, however, it's not starting until mid-January. The NBA would also start in mid-October, but it's not starting until Tuesday. The NFL is almost done with its season. However, there's been no fans or anything like that in attendance, so it's been a bit of a weird atmosphere. Same with the NCAA, as well as all these cancellations and all of these people with this COVID-19 reserve list making things difficult with all these different teams having different length seasons and whatnot. But nonetheless, we are still here. College, conference, finals season, and in just a few short weeks from now, bowl game season as well as semi-finals season. I'll be getting a little bit more into that later. But until we get there, we need to go over what is going to lead up into the CFP semifinals. What's going to lead into some of these super big bowl games coming up in the next couple weeks. Oh, yes, conference finals. And there were a couple of them that were really huge. Some of these teams were keeping streaks alive. Some of these teams needed this game in order to even have a shot at the CFP. Some of them needed to win in order to either keep their spot or to earn a spot in the CFP. Depending on who you were, the position you were in was very clear. If you were any of Alabama or Ohio State, you had to win in relatively convincing fashion. If you were Clemson or Notre Dame, you needed a win, but if you lost, it had to be a close game. And I think the way that the teams panned out, I'm going to simply say this. A&M, Oklahoma, and Florida, so far, yet so close. But I remember I saw this thing, this little graphic, I don't remember who it was from, on Twitter, pointing out if there was a 16-team format instead of a 4-team format. And let me just simply say this, the top 16 did not really interest me as much. I think if you extended it to 8, there could have been a little bit of intrigue with A&M, Oklahoma, Florida, and Cincinnati. There would have been intrigue for sure. Maybe one upset at best, but unlikely. I honestly think if we had A&M, Oklahoma, Florida, and Cincinnati in the mix, there'd be maybe one upset out of the bunch. However, the thing about the top 4 teams that are in, Alabama, Clemson, Ohio State, and Notre Dame, is that there's way too much talent there amongst those 4 teams. And a lot of that really showed in these conference final games because of the fact that the conference finals were right there for the taking and because of the fact that they had so much influence on what is going to come next. Everything that we're going to see on New Year's Day is, for the most part, going to pick up where these games left off. And there were a lot to bestow upon these games. Like, for example, what was considered the game of the year just about a month ago, kind of a dud in round 2. It was a game where it was touted to be this epic matchup, this Battle of the Titans, and then it turns out to be a blowout. Of course, I'm talking about the ACC Championship between Clemson and Notre Dame. There was nothing super special going on about this game to almost any degree. But I wanted to preface this, but I actually want to come to that a little bit later, because there was another game where we could have seen something really good. It was two relatively very physical teams. It was one team that had talent all up and down the field. Every single position, there was just talent on talent on talent. And it was insane how much talent these two teams had. However, the thing that is not really considered is just how certain play styles go into all of this. Because the thing is that Northwestern versus Ohio State going into it seemed like a pretty decent matchup. Going into it, of course. Didn't end up being that great of a matchup, not exactly. But Northwestern definitely gave themselves a shot. They looked like they were up to par going into it. And then something just happens after halftime, and all of a sudden they do not seem like they're remotely competent at all. It seems like these were just a team of two offenses who just could not pass offensively, and two defenses who just seemed absolutely dominant. That was my take out of it. A trio of sacks for each team. Northwestern got 7 tackles for loss. Ohio State got 9. Northwestern's defense deflected 5 passes, and Ohio State's deflected a pair. 1 fumble on each team. 2 interceptions on each team. The turnovers were real for these teams. And whatever happened in terms of the lack of offensive firepower was clearly real for both Northwestern and Ohio State. The thing about Ohio State is that they were a very good team. They were the team that a lot of teams and a lot of reporters and a lot of people just said were one of those teams who could definitely take it all the way. However, I think Saturday didn't really show as much of what it should have. Saturday, to me, left a lot hanging. It left a lot to the imagination. It left a lot to the eye. It took an expectation that I thought I had of the Buckeyes and kind of lowered the bar a little bit. And this game was an ugly game. Only 329 yards total for Northwestern, 513 total yards for Ohio State. 399 of those were on the ground. 105 of those were on the ground for Northwestern. Justin Fields most certainly did not have his greatest game of the year thus far. And for someone who's supposed to be a Heisman candidate, that cannot be the case. If you're supposed to be taken seriously as a Heisman candidate, you cannot be throwing only 44% completion. 44% completion, 12 of 27, that's not good. No top-tier quarterback should be doing that. Peyton Ramsey was semi-efficient at 64.8%. However, both of these quarterbacks were struggling really hard. I don't know what it was, but none of them could get anything done. Everything was essentially carried on the back of the running games. The craziest thing was one of those games of a lifetime by someone you've never heard of. I mean, sure, Cam Porter got 61 yards and a touchdown. But the thing that shocked me the most was Trey Sermon, a senior product from Georgia, 331 yards in this game rushing. He had 344 going into the game in an entire year thus far. So if you include this win in the Big 10 Championship, Ohio State goes 6-0. Trey Sermon, 344 yards on the ground in 5 games. With 1 touchdown in 5 games. He just got 13 yards shy of that in only 1 game. In 1 game, 13 yards shy of his entire senior year. I think that's one of those things you can attribute up to having something to play for. I think that's one of those things you can attribute to that last chance, so you just have to bring it. I think Sermon, because he was without doubt the star of the game. Trey Sermon just going all out, 331 yards and 29 carries for a pair of touchdowns. Easily the star of the game, 100%. But I think it's one of those circumstances where it's potentially his last game ever, which we now know it won't be because they advanced to the CFP. But in the moment, if they lost, that would have been his last game ever. Most likely in the entirety of the sport of football. And if that was his last game, he most certainly would have had a performance to remember. Easily Finals MVP. Because it's one of those things where when you have that extra bit of something to play for, there's just something that clicks in you and it just puts you on another level. I think if Trey Sermon did not have the performance that he had, if he just had an average performance, and the way that Master T kind of performed throughout the game on his 2 carries and 1 reception, it could have been done. But I just think that it would have been a game where both teams would have been absolutely lost. I mean, possession was close, 28.5 minutes to 31.5 minutes. Northwestern was way more efficient on 3rd down. Justin Fields had a dud of a game. And in doing so, absolutely tanking his draft stock, which I will get to in another time. But this is really a game where you just see one guy just wanting to bring it all for what could be his potential last performance ever in the Scarlet and Silver. And what a phenomenal one it was. And I'm going to go back to the one game that I mentioned a little bit earlier in this segment. The one where it should have been the game of the year part 2. But it wasn't. I definitely would have picked Clemson minus 10. Like the line was going into this game. Ended up being a 24-point game. I would have picked Clemson minus 10. But after seeing that performance throughout the game, oh my goodness, what was that? Honestly, this one game alone might make me question why Notre Dame is in the playoff. Looking into Notre Dame and Clemson a little bit longer and taking a bit of a deeper dive into that game, one thing that couldn't help but notice was that this is the first time, at least for a lot of us, that we have seen Trevor Lawrence on a big stage. If I'm not mistaken, the last time we've seen Trevor Lawrence in a big stage was maybe the game versus Miami earlier in the year, back on October the 10th, where Miami was ranked number 7, Clemson was ranked number 1. It was a 42-17 blowout in favor of the Tigers. The only national stage that Clemson has had, it was against the Notre Dame Fighting Irish. However, Trevor Lawrence was out on the COVID list. And they instead were playing their backup, the freshman DJ Uiagalelei. To be fair, Uiagalelei had a great game. But there was just something about having your starter back. And this goes with almost every single team, where something about the mentality just changes. Something about the team's identity changes. Something about the scheme, the identity, the mindset, everything changes. So yeah, Clemson kind of steamrolled Notre Dame. Part of that is because Notre Dame was very inefficient on 3rd down, only 3 of 12. And Clemson, on the other hand, was very efficient on 3rd down, 8 of 14. Clemson also really piled on the yardage, 541 to 263. And a lot of that was because if you had to look at combinations, and if you had to look at personnel, one thing that's often really looked at is trios. Who are some of the top trios in their respective leagues? Most often it's a running back, a wide receiver, and a quarterback. You would look at maybe Patrick Mahomes, Tyreek Hill, and Clyde Edwards-Helaire. You would maybe look at Devontae Adams, Aaron Rodgers, and Aaron Jones. You look at those big trios, those big three, Amari Rodgers, Travis Etienne, Trevor Lawrence. They've been absolutely stellar so far this year. Even though Lawrence really stole the show here and he was the main headline, Etienne to me was, if not Lawrence, the star of the show. Honestly, I think Clemson re-cemented themselves as a number 2 seed, which they absolutely did this week. Because for them, it's not about just beating Notre Dame. It's not about just the ACC. It's about getting the ship. Because it eluded them so closely last year. And yeah, Clemson's 10-1, but under Trevor Lawrence, they still only have one loss ever in his career, and it was against Joe Burrow in the national championship last year. That's the one loss of Trevor Lawrence's career because of the fact that he is seen as such a highly regarded talent, and because he's seen in such high regard ever since he's gotten into the league. And it's actually why the NFL's first overall draft pick is known as the Trevor Lawrence sweepstakes. Because he's that good. Mixed that with the talent around him he's been given, Clemson has the total package. Clemson is also one of those really weird teams where they can be really good when they're hurt, but they're significantly better when they're healthy. If I recall correctly, when these two teams played the first time, I believe 5 of Clemson's starters, or a number close to that ballpark, were all injured or all on the COVID list, including Trevor Lawrence. Clemson had a bunch of starters on the COVID list or either injured, and a bunch of them came back this past week. Both on the offensive side and defensive side of the ball. It made a ginormous difference. 6 sacks, 10 tackles for loss for Clemson. Notre Dame only got half of that with 5 tackles for loss and 2 sacks. And the only real turnover that was on either team was Kyle Hamilton getting kind of a lucky deflection. Good zone read, if you will. But at the same time, it doesn't change the fact that after Notre Dame's field goal and after missing the second field goal on their second drive, the Fighting Irish just seemed very flat. It's one of those things where it's a momentum killer, where, you meet the team to beat in the ACC, you score a field goal, you pick them off on their first drive, and then you're right there, pretty much a chip shot field goal to take what is going to be a 6-0 lead. And then the rest of the game, it's downs, punt, punt, end of the half, punt, 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 touchdown, punt. I'm not going to lie, the Fighting Irish kind of disappointed me. Not just offensively, but defensively as well. Yes, they got 1 interception, but they also still allowed 500-plus yards. They also allowed a lot of yardage, both to Trevor Lawrence in the air and on the ground to Travis Etienne and company. You can't even forget the fact that Trevor Lawrence also got a touch on his legs as well, so he technically has 3 total touchdowns. If you include the ground yardage, Trevor Lawrence is over 410 yards and 3 touchdowns. It really shook up the way that the college football playoff panned out, because now Clemson owns number 2, and now Notre Dame goes down to number 4. Which means Notre Dame is not going to be playing Clemson Part 3. It's now going to be Ohio State Clemson, Alabama Notre Dame. I'll be going more into those games, as well as the last 2 of the most notable conference finals in next week's show. That has been all for today. Thank you so much for tuning in and listening to this week's installment of the GSMC College Football Podcast. Make sure you subscribe, write a comment, and a review. It really means a lot to us. Don't forget to rate us 5 stars, and be sure to like us on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and share this on all your favorite social media platforms. There's going to be no Saturday show this week, so I hope you have an amazing Christmas or whatever holiday you celebrate. And I will see you back here next week, Wednesday. For all of us here at the GSMC Podcast Network, this has been the GSMC College Football Podcast. I'm Ryan Lee. Have a great rest of your night and a happy holiday.
You've been listening to the Golden State Media Concepts College Football Podcast, part of the GSMC Podcast Network. You can find this show and others like it at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Download our podcasts on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, Google Play, or anywhere you find podcasts. Just type in GSMC to find all of our shows from the GSMC Podcast Network. From football to basketball, baseball to MMA, and even soccer. You can also follow us on Twitter and Facebook. Thank you, and we hope you have enjoyed today's episode of the Golden State Media Concepts College Football Podcast.